Good evening and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson 203 and 204, Hilchos Adumah from chapter 2 until 7. One of the most famous presentation for Farbrengens audience that the Rabbi was having with the soldiers of Tzahal, of Israeli Defense Force, which were visiting in 770, and many of them were injured throughout different operations and war that the army were conducting against our enemies. So, and at that audience, the Rebbe suggested to switch the name that were given to them by the official to Metzuyonei Tzahal. Metzuyonim means the excellence of the army. And the Rebbe explains, after thanking and praising them for all they have done in behalf of the Jewish nation, with the following explanation. Since God Almighty is Tachli, the ultimate of good, and obviously anything negative cannot come out from him, nevertheless, if we see a person who is lacking any ability or any functionality in part of his body, this implies that God Almighty provides him sufficient strength in the remaining or other parts of his existence in order to compensate what he is missing and what he is lacking in other parts. How much more so that the results or the reason for their so-called insufficiency came as an outcome for their willing to sacrifice themselves towards defending and saving Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. So first of all, I was thinking regarding the story about the situation that this particular shiur will be dedicated in their honor of the soldier and the honor of a great and immediate victory. And at the same time, the moral of this story happens to be reflected in the contents of the first chapter of the Rambam of today. The first chapter of the Rambam today explains that the reason that so many additional stringencies were introduced in connection to Parah Adumah, because initially a point needed to be made in order to rule out, negate the opinion of the Tzidukim who were opposing or limiting the involvement of a Tvul Yoim, and as we have explained previously, that deliberately they imposed a tumo upon the Kohen and made him toivel, dip in the mikveh the same day, and make sure that he is getting involved in the Parah before the sunset. In other words, since ma'aseho, the action and the steps of the Parah are being done in a Tvul Yoim, so in order that people were not going to be mezalzel and take the entire Parah Adumah lightly, they have introduced other chumros, other severities, in order to make a point that the so-called kulos, light aspects that we find in Parah, is not because Parah is any lighter than any other korbanos. The reason why they have introduced the kula of Tvul Yoim in order to make a point, rule out the view of the Tzidukim, and in order to make sure that this is the reason, there are many other severities and many other chumras. For example, they were separating the Kohen. Similarly, the same process that a Kohen Gadol used to take place before Yom Kippur, separating him 7 days before Yom Kippur to a special chamber. Same way, before the burning of the polo, they used to separate and designate a very specific department in the temple, which used to be called Lishkas Even, the chamber of stone. The reason why it was called Lishkas Even, since the entire usage was done over there with clay even, with utensils of stones, as we have learned many times, that they are not susceptible to tumah. Another stringency, no touching were allowed by his fellow kohanim in order for him not to become tomei. Every day they were sprinkling upon him from the water of Parah Adumah in order to make sure that he is in fact pure from any possible tumah that stuck to him. However, he is not aware to it. The only thing that on the fourth day, they were not sprinkling upon him, and for that reason, the first day of the separation used to take always on a Wednesday, in order that the fourth day, when the sprinkling is not being done, should fall on a Shabbos, where anyway sprinkling is not being done. The sprinkling in those days upon the Kohen from the water of the Parah Adumah were done by specific children who grew up and were raised in a very specific way, to an extent that they were never in their life exposed to any tumas meis. The way it was done, that special areas, designated areas which were built upon stone, which underneath it there is no way that tumah will be there, and when they grew up, they were taken also with special bowls that their shoulders were very wide, and upon their shoulders very wide doors were placed in order to separate between, again, any possible tumah that may be exposed on the way to the shiloyach. When they have reached to the shiloyach, they were drawing water, and right before they were actually sprinkling the water upon the Kohen, who were eventually going to get involved in the polo, they were getting additional tvilo. They were dipping themselves into mikveh just in order to purify from any other tumois, which maybe they have been exposed. The reason why this entire process were made, since that the Kohen who actually will be involved in the process of the polo, he must be prepared and purified with or by a person who were never exposed to tumas meis. The second chapter is dealing about the process, the location of the Har HaMishcho, the Mount of Olive, where the actual slaughtering and the burning were taking place. There is quiet attention were given to the path that were leading from the temple until that particular stage on Mount Olive, where the slaughter and the burning of the polo used to take place. The paths were built in such a way that even a possibility of exposure to kever at home, to any piece of tumah which may be underneath it, so in order to prevent any type of exposure, the arches were built in such a way that few stages of arches were built, one not on top of each other, but each and every arch were built on two half arches. So that way, even if there is a possibility of a tumor underneath the path, will be blocked based upon those principles of Tumas Mace and the type of blockage that will prevent any transmission of tumor. On the actual stage, they were organizing the trees made out of cedars and sometimes fig trees, smooth. The front of the stage used to face west, and special windows were made to the lumbers and to the woods that were organized upon this stage in order for the fire to be catching up smoothly. The slaughter of the cow were made with the right hand, and the containing and receiving of the blood were made in the left hand, right into the hand. Then the Kohen used to dip the right hand, the right finger of the right hand into the blood that was in the left hand and sprinkle towards the Kodesh HaKodoshim, towards the direction of the Kodesh HaKodoshim. For each and every sprinkle, he used to wipe the blood with the body of the pole and make an additional dip into the left hand in order to continue to sprinkle. For each and every dip, one sprinkle. After finishing the sprinkling, then he sets up the fire and he waits until the stomach of the cow will get cut because of the fire, and only at that point he throws into the fire the Eitz Erez, Ezoiv, and Shnito Eloas, a type of trees and branches which are mentioned right in the Torah. He can throw them all at once or one after the other. In any way it will be kosher. After the completion of the fire, the preparation of the ashes were taking place, where at the end of the process they were dividing the remaining ashes into three parts. One part were remaining on the Mount Aleph in order to purify any one of our nation in the future. Part were given into the Cheil as a storage lemishmeres, and the third part were given to those mishmoros, to the shifts of Kohanim who used to serve weekly. Each and every week were a different mishmeres in order to purify any future Kohanim. And the Rambam in this particular halacha mentioned the amount of polis that were done from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, which are reaching the number 9. One cow were made by Moshe Rabbeinu and lasted for almost 1,000 years until Ezra HaSofer made the second cow, and throughout the second temple, additional 7 were made. So in a total of red heifers that were done from the beginning until now were 9 heifers, where the 10th one will be done by Melech HaMoshiach, and as the Rambam completes the fact, Yigole Omen Ken Yehi Rotzain. This is one of the places where the Rambam, within a halacha, he expresses a wish of the coming of Moshiach. It should be done speedily. Since the Rambam will never repeat more than once, so essentially this time that he expresses over here the wish and the prayer will apply to all other places as well. It is important to note that Moshe Rabbeinu, since each and every item that he was involved was lasting forever, we see also a sense of a permanent lasting of the afer, of the ashes of the Parah that he produced for relatively such a long time. In the third chapter, the discussion is regarding specific stipulations that are necessary in the process of the Parah. Some of them are critical, some of them are not. For example, it is forbidden to slaughter simultaneously more than one cow, since the Torah specifies v'shochates haporo, he should slaughter the cow singular. By emphasizing singular is avoiding and ruling out any possibility of mass slaughter. The lishmo, the intention, is critical. If a person were lacking the intention, the heifer is pasul. A kohen who is missing one of the garments, he will also disqualify the Parah. The receiving of the blood must be done in the hand. If it's done via a container or vessel, will disqualify of the Parah. Even the sprinkling must be done with the right hand. If it was done in the left hand, the Parah is disqualified. On the other hand, the hazor can be shared amongst 7 kohanim as long as they are not doing it simultaneously, which means they are allowed to do it one after the other. The direction towards the heichol is very critical. Any lessening in the amount of the hazois will disqualify the korban. Any delay in the hazois towards the night will disqualify the korban. Any burning outside the stage will disqualify the korban. On the other hand, there is a leniency where a person can slaughter and sprinkle the blood today and burn the cow tomorrow. This is one of the few items where lino is not going to disqualify the korban, because generally speaking, in most of the korbanos, lino, which means an overnight sleep, will disqualify the korban, where not the case is not in a Parah Adumah. Burning can be done even without lumber. If a person has an alternative way to burn the cow without any lumber or woods, will be acceptable. Even if a kohen happens to be a oinen or mechusar kippurim, his involvement will be acceptable. As long that we are holding in the process until the point it becomes ashes, it must be done in the day, cannot be done in the night, and it must be done by male kohanim. And any melocho, any type of work that is being done while he's involved in the Parah, will disqualify the Parah Adumah. However, at the point that the ashes is there, it's already turned to ashes, from that point on can be done even by a lady, even at night, and any other melocho not going to be disqualifying the korban. The last halacha is very interesting in the sense that it is displaying how far the kavono, the intention, plays an important role. For example, if a person were slaughtering the animal, and while he was slaughtering the animal, another behemo, which is not kodshim, was slaughtered on the way. So the Parah will be kosher and as a Parah Adumah, and the other animal will be also kosher for consumption, because a slaughter of a behemoth chulin, of a normal behemoth which is not kodesh, will be acceptable even without a kavono. However, if a person had an intention to cut a pumpkin, and while he was cutting the pumpkin, he was cutting the Parah as well. In such a case, since his intention was to do a melocho, to do a normal, mundane, not a holy work, so this intention of his will disqualify the polo from being kosher polo Adumah. Now we're moving to lesson 204 and a few introductory sentences. Since the Torah linking or categorizing the particular mitzvah commandment of Parah Adumah to the category of chuko. Chuko is those type of mitzvahs that they have no rhyme or reason. And Rashi, in beginning of Parshas Chukas, by explaining why it's called Chukas, from the idea choik, without a reasoning, he explains that always verbal abuse were taking place towards the Jewish people. How dare you are careful in the concept of polo, and what type of reasoning behind. One of the ways that polo, though Rashi gives many symbolic explanation based upon the teaching of Reb Moshe Hadarshan, and which raised many questions by the commentaries. How dare you still calling the mitzvah chuko after so many explanations were given? And the general idea that the polo came to atone for the sin of the golden calf, as a parable is being brought that when a child makes a mess, the mother cleans up the mess. So same way the child is a reference to the calf, which this was the mess that we were getting into at the Chet Egel. Comes the mother, comes the polo, and cleans up the mess. Nevertheless, there is still an element of chuko, and one of those chuko is coming into realization in the fact that the kohen who is purifying the person who is currently in a state of tum'o, he becomes tomei. So generally the rule is that poro metaheres esatmeim, makes the people who are already tomei, makes them pure, and at the same time metamaas esatehoirim, makes those people who are currently pure, makes them tomei. The Rabbi explains that even this idea has some reasoning based upon two different historical references. One historical reference is from the story of Mordechai HaTzadik, where the Megillah describes the pain and the sorrow he was experiencing when he found out what type of decree we are facing throughout the events of Purim. And the Torah, the Megillah, refers in the expression Asher Korohu, what happens to him, although he personally was not having any direct effect from the decree, but nevertheless his sensitivity to feel for another Jew, another fellow, the Torah, the Megillah describe Asher Korohu. Then there is a second reference to a more recent historical event about the Mittel Rebbe, where he stopped once upon a time the Chidus, since someone came to him with a request for a tikkun for an act he committed where he couldn't find even bedakus dedakus, in a very nuanced or roundabout way, that he himself was also stumbled in this type of a act. The reason why is it necessary? Because in order to provide a help, a rescue, a upgrade of its status towards the better, the person who contributes must have a certain sensitivity, and for that reason Like Imoy Onoichi Betzoro, there is the outcome when the person is involved in purifying others. On the way, he himself gets the result of the tumo. Similar, and by the way, as far as the tumo, not only he himself becomes tome, but also his garment. And since his garment becomes tome, any kelim that he touches, any utensil he touches, but again, only while he is loi piresh mimetamov, while he is still involved in the Parah Adumo, only then, not only he becomes a tome tumas erev until the evening, and after he goes to the mikveh and there is sunset, he becomes perfectly pure. And by the way, also, this exposure to tumo that takes place is only when the poro or nothing posul have damaged the poro. In other words, if the poro was slaughtered and brought according to kohalocho, only then such a poro that was perfectly offered, the kohen who is getting involved in this poro, he becomes tome. But if the poro was nifsal, was disqualified for whatever reason, whether it was something wrong with the sprinkling, whether there's something wrong with the location, whatever disqualifies the poro, so then the kohen who is burning and slaughtering the poro, he is not becoming tome. This phenomena of being contaminated in a tumo while a person he is in a process of kodoshim, this is a phenomena that exists not only in Parah Adumo, it exists also in Porim Hanisrofim, those bulls that are being burnt as part of their offering outside Yerushalayim, which are generally those chatois which are being brought by the Sanhedrin for them giving the wrong instruction, or a Kohen HaMoshiach who gave the wrong instruction for himself, as we have covered it in the halachos of Sefer Korbanos. Similar phenomena takes place also in the goat, which are sent to the Azazel on Yom Kippurim to atone for the sins of the Jewish people, and the person who is actually carrying it to the Azazel experiencing also a similar result in his status by him becoming tome as part of the process of taking the goat to the Azazel. The second chapter is concentrating about the water, those water where the ashes of the poor were placed. So first of all, to bring the water, to draw the water, it must be done directly from the or a river or a lake or a wellspring, and it must be done directly from the wellspring into the kli, into the vessel. The second stage of putting the ashes into the container is called kiddush, sanctifying. Those water are called or mei nido or mei chatos, and after the ashes were placed into the water, so they will be called maim mekudoshim. To draw the water into the vessel can be done by everybody besides a cheresh shoite v'koten, someone who is a minor or mentally challenged, or someone who is deaf and mute at the same time. A person can fill up with any form of a vessel as long as it's not broken, as long as there is no hole in it, and with an egg of a shell of a bird, he's also forbidden to fill up. As we have mentioned, if a person were helping to bring the water into the vessel, not directly from the water, but with the support of his hand or his feet, the water will be possible. Any source of water will be kosher. However, source of water that comes from the sea, from the ocean, will be possible. Even the water of springs that they are salty, or they are coming from springs which are called mechazvin, which once in less than 7 years they are drying out. So although it is a spring, but since they come from unreliable springs, what makes them reliable is a non-stop stream of water for more than 7 years. If they cannot maintain a constant stream of water for 7 years, will be called unreliable water, and bringing water from them will disqualify the water. The third chapter is dealing with side issues that will disqualify the process of filling the water. For example, a melocho, any type of work, will disqualify the filling of the water. On the other hand, when it comes to kiddush, which means placing the ashes into the water, the melocho, any type of work, is not going to disqualify them. However, monetary compensation will. When it comes to fill up the water, it will be exactly the opposite. Monetary compensation won't disqualify the filling up of the water, but melocho will. Though a person is prohibited to take compensation for the kiddush, nevertheless will still be okay for him to receive schar batolo. Batolo is not a compensation for the service, but a compensation for him losing a pre-existing source of income that he is losing as a result for him getting involved in the kiddush. For example, if as a result of him being mekadesh those water, he is losing a job, or he is losing other opportunity which could have produced him a X amount of dollars, and he is getting this as a sort of a payment, but again, it's not a payment for the service, but it is a compensation for the lack, for the losses. It's a payment for losses. What will determine what is a melocho or not depends a lot in the intention of the person who is actually filling up the water. For example, a person can fill up the water in many barrels in order to sanctify them, in order to put into one kiddush. So then all the water will be kosher. However, if he filled up many barrels in order to sanctify them one after the other, in such a case, all the choviyos, all the barrels besides the last one, will be pasul, since the filling up of the water of the all choviyos besides the last one, they happen to be a melocho, a work that was done before the kiddush of the last one, and for that reason they will disqualify the water. Also, if a melocho is being done and not interrupting his routine action, it's not going to be considered a melocho in regard to the act that will disqualify the water. Thank you very much, and a good chodesh.